Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Andrew Bartolotta. We're always honored to bring you conversations with individuals and organizations making an impact in our community and around the globe. And today we're diving into the rich history of Music City, Nashville, with the CEO of Nashville History on Tour, David Steele Ewing. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Andrew, it's great to be on your program, and welcome to hearing more about Nashville.
Absolutely. And I'm so excited because you are a wealth of knowledge. Before we talk about Nashville History on Tour, give listeners an idea for your background as a ninth generation Nashvilleian.
Yes, well, Andrew, being ninth generations mean the first three were involuntary. My ancestors were brought here enslaved by the founders of Nashville. We're the oldest Black family, the Ewings are. And what's also interesting is we were enslaved by two very famous plantations here in Nashville, the Hermitage, which is Andrew Jackson's home, and John Overton, Traveler's Rest. And so my ancestors were tied to both of those plantations.
I like that you acknowledge that you say the first three generations were involuntary. And so there's a lot of history that goes in just those times as well. And you connect visitors, locals, and even businesses to Nashville's rich history while also explaining how it enriches the future of our area. Talk about some of the top tours you offer, like African American history in Nashville, architectural tours, and even a half-day tour.
Yeah, Nashville's a city of stories and storytellers. And when you come to visit a city, you want an insider, you want an immersive experience, and not just feel like you're hearing a Wikipedia entry being read at you. You have to bring these stories and people to life. One of my favorite things to talk about is the civil rights movement and the lunch counter sit-ins that took place here in 1960. My mother went to school with John Lewis at Fisk. They were classmates. And so I grew up hearing more about John Lewis than Dr. Martin Luther King, and more about Diane Nash than Rosa Parks, because those were my mother's friends at Fisk. And retracing the steps of John Lewis and his first good trouble here in Nashville is always exciting and fun. We have a lot of tourists now that don't live in the South, but they literally want to retrace those steps. They go to Memphis and they go to the National Civil Rights Museum. They'll come to Nashville. They'll go to Selma, Edmund Pettus Bridge. They'll go to Birmingham's National Civil Rights Museum. And of course, Montgomery has recently opened up the museum to talk about lynching. And so you have people that want these stories, and they want them to understand not what happened, but kind of why and how that impacts what's going on today in the world.
Being able to acknowledge the past authentically and share that history without it being sort of glazed over in a history book, and realize that it wasn't too far. We're not still so far removed from the sit-ins, only 60 years? I'm right. Terrible at math, but
yeah, 60. The minister who baptized me, Reverend Kelly Miller Smith Sr., was one of John Lewis's mentors when he was in college at American Baptist College. And my church had a lot to do with the civil rights movement during that time. Dr. King spoke at the church a lot, and we just grew up kind of around those people. And so I'm the next generation of people telling those stories and making the context together. We have a lot of African American family reunions that come to Nashville, a lot of corporate groups, and then just a lot of people. Obviously, the country music part is a big part of our brand, but to me, civil rights is just as important, because what went on here in this movement that took place here, from the Freedom Riders to the lunch counter sit-ins, made national figures out of people, including John Lewis.
You've served you're very philanthropic and love to get involved. And so you've served on over 30 Nashville boards, including the Nashville Symphony, the Metro Historic Zoning Commission, and more. Talk about your experience serving on boards, and maybe some advice for those who seek to serve their community by looking to be involved as a leader with a nonprofit or even government entity.
We have a lot of great leadership organizations here. And when I was in my 20s, I went through a program here in Nashville called the Young Leaders Council. And it was a program that trained people in leadership skills and to be on a not-for-profit board one day. And you'd be an intern on a not-for-profit board. One of the boards I'm involved with, which is the Conservancy of the Parthenon in Centennial Park, we have a Young Leaders intern on our board. And that's just great. Being on not-for-profit boards is where everything happens in Nashville. the fundraising, the big picture thinking, and the governing too. When I was on the symphony board, I was fortunate to be asked by the chair of the board, Martha Ingram, to be on the building committee as well. And we built a symphony hall in 2006, which is truly one of the best in the country. And just all the kind of things that we thought about is like, where's the marble going to come from? How many seats it's going to sit? The acoustics, and one of the great things about the symphony hall, if you look at a lot of kind of great buildings, there's obviously a front entrance which is really grand, but the back part is blank and there's no windows and things like that. Martha Ingram really wanted every section of that building to look nice. And so whether it be the Third Avenue side or the Demonbreun side, there are balconies and there's windows. And the other thing is inside the symphony hall, the same thing. If you go up to the third level, there are balconies, there are arch ceilings, and there's concessions out there. Sometimes when you go to a building and you're up in the kind of upper levels, you feel like you're not in the nice space. But every space of that symphony hall is just beautiful.
That's really cool. Now you also do historical consulting. What is that, and what does that look like for developers, conventions coming in, business owners?
Downtown has a lot of old buildings, a lot of 19th century buildings. And since we're so popular right now, these buildings are being redeveloped at a rapid pace. And most of the time when these buildings change hands for tens of millions of dollars here in Nashville, they don't really know much about the use except the last 10 or 20 years. And so I do a deep dive and find old photographs and find previous uses. And some of the buildings that I've helped be a consultant on include the Dream Hotel, which is on 4th Avenue near Printers Alley, Alan Jackson's Good Time Bar on Lower Broadway, Acme, Merchants, and then the old Paradise Park, which is now becoming Garth Brooks's Friends in Low Places bar. So when you look, a lot of developers, they'll hire architects and engineers and zoning people, but you really need to have the history too, because people want that authentic experience. And they're curious. And oftentimes, if you go to a hotel and restaurant and you ask someone about a building, they may not know the story, or they just have made up something that just really isn't true. And the other thing I've consulted on in the past is the Ryman Auditorium, one of my favorite buildings. I'm actually writing a book on the Ryman right now. It's known as the Mother Church of Country Music, but it's so much more than just even the Opry being there from 1943 to 1974. Dr. King was there, Booker T. Washington, John Philip Sousa, all these wonderful entertainers, big voices, even people like Neil Diamond in the early 70s performed there. And what I learned through my consulting with the Ryman is today you'll get these people that want to play the Ryman, which is only 2,400 seats, whether it be Garth Brooks or Vince Gill or Faith and Tim or the Foo Fighters or Jack White. They could easily play our arena across the street, or some even our stadium across the river. They play the building because of the wonderful acoustics and the great history. When you stand on the Ryman stage, you feel like you're in a special place. And most of the time when you go to a concert, the performer on the stage thanks the city. But when you go to the Ryman, you're like, wow, it's great. And it's an honor to be in the Ryman.
I agree. I've had the fortunate opportunity to see quite a few acts at the Ryman, and I've seen those same acts in larger stadiums, and it is not the same. Like you said, just over 2,000 seats. So it's very intimate. And it is a, dare I say, biblical experience, a holy experience being in the Ryman, and that music and the acoustics, it is just beautiful. Now, for those either new to living in Middle Tennessee or looking to visit, give us some of your top places to eat, explore, shop.
Nashville used to not be this amazing foodie town, but we are. And, I realized that probably about 15 years ago. I was in one of my favorite places called City House in Germantown. And there was a couple from New York, and he was a general counsel for the clothing store. And they were here, and I asked him, why are you here in Nashville? Are you doing work? And he's like, no, I kept on hearing you had all these great restaurants, and my wife and I wanted to spend the weekend and go to them. I was like, wait a minute, that never happened. And so down the street from City House is Henrietta Red, another favorite of mine. Cafe Margot is just celebrating 21 years in East Nashville. And a lot of these are chef owned and chef driven, and that's what kind of makes our cuisine well. We have to shout out to our OGs in Nashville, Prince's Hot Chicken, We,
Yes.
the same family that invented hot chicken back in the 30s is still in business at the wonderful 5th and Broadway development across from the Ryman and the Bridgestone Arena. And then our boys from TSU, Slim and Huskies, they have a location there. Their original location is in Nashville. Of course, you all have a location in Memphis too, but if you've never been to Slim and Huskies, you just have to, it's that 90s vibe of art and music and great food. It's very retro, and I think that's what people like.
Yes, I love whenever I'm in town in Nashville, just enjoying the food scene. There are so many great restaurants, both like you said, the OGs that are there, like Prince's Hot Chicken, to newer establishments that chefs that have literally moved across the country to bring their restaurant to Nashville to be part of that eclectic and growing food scene that is top notch. It's really cool. And yeah, there are so many. There's a place called Husk that I love.
Husk, Sean Brock,
Yeah.
yeah, he started that, but now Sean's got a place called the Continental, and he's got Audrey's too. I mean, Audrey's is like this upscale experience that like no other. You walk in, the furniture, the art, the food, the service. I mean, it's one of those things you have to get reservations well in advance, but it's quite an experience, a special occasion experience. And I know a lot of your listeners are in Memphis. I have to talk about our barbecue. I know Memphis likes theirs, but we have some great barbecue places here. Martin's Barbecue, of course, Ed Lee's, and then Peg Leg Porker. We've got some really good barbecue in Nashville.
Good to know. Now, your Instagram, the Nashville I Wish I Knew, is chock full of beautiful historic pieces and artifacts. Talk about some of your favorite posts or ones that have gone viral or people that really related to.
The Nashville I Wish I Knew is kind of like my online museum of things that I like and kind of miss about Nashville. Any post related to the old Opryland theme park gets a lot of responses and nostalgia. And of course, anything Dolly. Tennesseans love Dolly Parton, and no matter what kind of image you have of Dolly, that's very popular. I remember a few years ago, we had just a blizzard of a snowstorm, and I was walking by Printer's Alley, and you could see the kind of old-fashioned kind of neon signs in the alley and just snow coming down heavily. And in the frame, there's a single figure walking in the snow. It's kind of like it's time to make the donuts. And he's got a guitar on his shoulder and an amp in his hands. And that's probably the most popular thing I've ever posted. I mean, it just went viral, that picture. But it's so Nashville that basically, even during this blizzard, here this creative person is walking to his gig on Lower Broadway to perform. And that's the kind of spirit of Music City, captured in one iPhone photograph.
You have also been recognized for finding some historical piece about Representative John Lewis. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you met with him as well after finding that?
So John Lewis was getting an award here in Nashville in 2016, and probably for about 6 years before, I was looking for the very first mugshots from John Lewis's Good Trouble here at the Woolworth Building. I would go to the Nashville Police Department and say, do you have them? And they said, we don't. Go to the library. The library would point me back to the police department, this endless loop. And so a couple of weeks before John Lewis was coming, I inquired to the police department again, you must have these photos, don't you? They sent out an email to somebody and came back pretty quickly and they said, no, we don't have them. But they remember the chief of police takes our new police recruits to the civil rights room in the library, and he had an arrest record of John Lewis. So with this number, I was sent to an archives in East Nashville that I didn't know about, a 2-story windowless archives with a lot of records. Now, most archives are in really good shape for people in the last 20 or 30 years, because those are the people you're looking for if you're the police department. They're not looking for people in their 70s and 80s. So those records weren't in such good shape. But nonetheless, this number matched with a box on the top shelf, pull it off, and open up the folders that in the outside said John Robert Lewis, and the inside had the 2 mugshots that I'd been looking for. And I took a picture of my phone, and I didn't post it on my Instagram. I texted them to the mayor of Nashville, who was a friend of mine, and I said, we have to blow these up and present to Congressman Lewis after he speaks. And so she texted back and said, Well, how do you know he hasn't seen these before? It's like, nobody has seen these before. These were lost in this archive. And so we blow them up and bring them out on an easel. And Congressman Lewis later tells the Associated Press he almost cried when he saw them. He had never seen them before. He told me privately that he remembers where he bought the suit that is pictured in there because he knew he was going to get arrested and he wanted to look good. And we gave him copies so he could show his family and his constituents in Washington. John was very proud of his time here in Nashville that got his start. So that was a story that made national news, including All Things Considered. And it was just an honor to basically find those and present to John Lewis before he died. Another story related to that, there's a park in East Nashville near the Titan Stadium called Douglas Park. And I'd always heard that was named after Frederick Douglass, even though we spelled our park with one S and he spelled his with two. And so when our former president talked about Frederick Douglass almost in the first person, that kind of got bumped up on my history to-do list. And I did the research, and sure enough, in the 30s, it was dedicated as Frederick Douglass Park. So I go to the Parks Board, the City Council, the mayor again, and have to go through all these hoops to jump over. And they changed the name and rededicated it because they took the name off of that, really because of racism in the 30s. After naming the park after them, the all-white park board just wanted to take away the honor. And the way they did it was just very sly by making it Douglas Park with one S. And so that was also a national story. And but history comes alive, and there's all sorts of hidden stories, not only in Nashville, but in all communities. And so I have a very long history to-do list, and that's what I'm always working on.
It also just shows the importance of historians like yourself that are willing to do the work and go through the loopholes to honor people that deserve to be honored and that have lost that throughout history because of things like racism, and being able to not only expose but celebrate the people that deserve to be celebrated is just a huge honor, and it must be so great. What puts a smile on your face when you look at the work that you're doing to make Nashville and make sure Nashville and the surrounding area's history continues to be told, celebrated, and shared?
I want to tell the stories of forgotten people and forgotten instances, because as we are building all these tall glass buildings and all these new big companies are coming in like Amazon and Oracle and AllianceBernstein, we need to remember kind of what laid the foundation for all of this. And so when I give tours, I want to tell the story not only of how we got here, but the people that made us the city we are today. It didn't happen overnight. We talked about the not-for-profit community. The not-for-profit community has been very important in the corporate relocation of a lot of companies. That Nissan, that moved their headquarters from California to Middle Tennessee almost 20 years ago, they came here because we had professional sports, and that we had a great opera and a symphony, and that we had great restaurants and other kind of amenities that people want. And the not-for-profit community has had a big impact on revitalizing downtown. In 2001, we had 3 entities that opened in downtown Nashville. One was the Frist Museum on Broadway and our old post office. The other was the Downtown Library, and then the New Country Music Hall of Fame. And they all opened that same summer of 2001. And that's why it's no coincidence, if you look at all the growth of Nashville, particularly the downtown area, they want to be near all the cool stuff. And that's why our success is continuing right now.
That's a great point about recruiting these large businesses. It's really because of the nonprofits and the government being able to provide opportunities for them and showcase just the amenities that Nashville and Middle Tennessee has to offer. David, where can people go to learn more about you, Nashville History on Tour, and more?
They could follow me on Instagram, which is the Nashville I Wish I Knew. Twitter is my name, David S. as in Sam, Ewing, E-W-I-N-G. And then the best place is really my website, which is www.nashvillehistoryontour.com. You could see the almost 50 tours I give. They're all private tours, and or I could customize a tour. I often have people that if they don't, I know exactly where I was during the great flood of 2010 here. I was giving a speech at Bellmead Country Club to some visiting surgeons from out of town. It was a history on Nashville hospitals, doctors, and medicine. And I've just done the research for that because I didn't have a tour based on that. I do now. So, if there's not a subject that I have on my website, and there's probably not, but I could come up with it.
David, thank you so much for the work that you're doing to preserve history in Nashville, celebrate those that deserve to be celebrated, and for being a change maker. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew.